Welcome to this video, a new part of the series about basic endgames and endgame theory. We now move to king and pawn endgames, and we start with the very basic ones, where just one king per side and one pawn is on the board. Let's start with a simple case. Sometimes the pawn is just promoting. Of course, here the c-pawn is white's trump card, and if it is white's to move, I should probably set it like that, then white is just
check,
promoting to the queen and wins. However, if it is black's to move in this position, black is in time to catch the pawn. Is it necessary to look at all the single moves in this line and calculate this beforehand? In fact, it is not, because here we learn one of the basic rules of those endgame, the rule of the square. You can draw a square like this from this pawn, and if the black king, here the defending king, is able to reach this square with him to move, then he's just in time to catch the pawn. That makes judging lots of those endgames a little bit easier, because you just see, okay, I'm entering the square and it's done. So black to move enters the square and draws. Just like that. However, it still makes sense to only apply that rule in this pure form. Let's say when there's nothing on the board. If there are other factors on the board, then definitely it needs to be checked if there is something else going on. For example, if we alter this position slightly, like here, with the pawn suddenly appearing on e6, it's a whole different thing. With black to move here, is this set already? Let's make sure it is. With black to move here, he can enter the square, but unfortunately not this square, because his own pawn is blocking the way. These kind of things can always happen and should be taken into account. You can even complicate this situation a little bit if you alter it like that. Here it's a bit more tricky. Let's say it's white's move here. The rule of the square here is a little bit twisted. Here white can win. He can also win in a different way, but one way to win is like that. e6, black takes, c5. At first we see, okay, black can enter, but we get the same thing as before. Black cannot go this way all the way to c8 to stop the pawn. Nevertheless, it's a very useful rule. It only should be used with a little bit of caution if there are other factors on the board, like those additional pawns or something like that. It is an entirely different matter if the defending king is in front of the attacking pawn or very close to that. Let's look at a typical position there. Here we see a typical position where the defending king is in front of the attacking pawn. Black is blocking the white pawn on the back rank. How is this position to be assessed? It all depends on the right to move, and I definitely should alter this to get a view like this of the board. It's all about whose right to move it is. If it is white's move, then he has nothing better than advancing the pawn, and after king e8,
stalemate,
king e6, it's unfortunately a stalemate. White to move cannot win. It's because black has the opposition, this opposing situation with the kings. If it is black's to move, however, I can change that here. Black really only has king e8. If he goes to c8, we just will promote the pawn. After king e8, we have e7, advancing to the 7th rank without a check. King f7, the only move, king d7, and we are going to get the pawn promoted. On the 6th rank, it's all about the right to move. I mean with the pawn on the 6th rank. With the pawn on the 5th rank, it's a little bit more complicated. Here we have a typical situation with the pawn on the 5th rank. With the pawn on the 5th rank, it's all about the key squares. What are key squares? Yeah, key squares are squares that if the white king here, the attacking king, is able to get to them, it will be a win. No matter whose move it is, this is very important. The key squares for this pawn are the ones on the 7th rank, and those 3 squares on the 6th rank. So we have a little rectangle of pawns here, of squares that are the key squares. Yeah, let's look at this to really understand what this means. It is not mattering really whose move it is. Once the white king gets to one of those squares, you win. In this specific position, it is white's move, and this means that the only way to win here is king e6, as we need to stay in the winning zone. King e6. Yeah, we have the opposition now. The black king needs to move. And then we step to the other side, and here we see that the white pawn will promote. This is also the reason why in the initial position, if we go back, why those squares, of course, are key squares. Once you reach this, you have the control over the squares that let the pawn promote. We should definitely check what happens if it is not white to move with king e6, but black to move. Let's change that here, and we let black move. If king d6, we can start to just move the pawn, because we reach the already known winning position with the pawn on the 6th rank. After king e8, e7, king f7, king d7, we will promote. And what about this? Remember the key squares, those squares. We need to stay there, king d7. And it's clear that we need to stay there because we cover all the crucial squares to get the pawn promoted. We just need to get to one of those squares to win. This also means that a number of other positions can be easily assessed. Let's say, for example, we change this position a little bit. With white to move, we know that these 2 squares are key squares, so we need to go there to win. Both win. So this is the easiest. But also this would win due to this move sequence. On the other hand, if we go back and we look at this with black to move, we can easily deduce what move black needs to play. Let's check this. Let's change this. Black also knows that he needs to prevent white from going to the key squares. So those 2 squares need to be controlled by the king. We can go here to do that, or we can go here to do that. In this case, it really doesn't matter, as we need to control those 2 squares. But this is normally the way to go, because you also take the opposition. It's a little bit simpler for the defender to remember. Those squares are the key squares. That's the absolutely paramount thing to remember here. Black needs to prevent white from going there. White wants to go there. Okay, let's now alter this a little bit. Okay, now we have the G pawn instead of one of the central pawns. It's a G pawn that's a little bit different, and the B pawn, so a mirror image, B and G pawn, so the knight pawns are a little bit different. What is identical, of course, is it's about the key squares. White is on one of those key squares, so he should win. And in fact, he does win. However, there is a little there's a little problem here in this position. If white, and I should definitely end this editing mode, if it is white to move, he should be aware that only with king h6 he can force a win. Why is that? King f6 is not throwing the win away, but after king h7, the problem is that what you want to do here is king f7 and now push the pawn. However,
stalemate.
That's very embarrassing. The problem is that we are at the edge of the board, and black, if you want, cannot play king to i8. Yeah, there is no I file. So white needs to be cautious and not go for that. The winning idea is to go to h6. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's the only way to win here. After king f8, we go to h7, and this thing is promoting. After h8, we just push the pawn and now force the promotion. It's about this stalemate trick that one should know about, because it can easily happen that you play, especially if it's a situation where you don't have any time on the clock, that you quickly play king f6 because it looks more normal to do, to go towards the center of the board. However, only king h6 is the most straightforward way to win here. Let's now look at pawns on the fourth rank. Yeah, a typical position. The pawn is on the fourth rank. Yeah, how to assess it? It's again about key squares. The key squares for a pawn on the fourth rank are these three. How does this unfold? It's all about whose side to move it is, and I definitely should do this again. I keep this board very often on setup mode. Yeah, it's all about whose move it is. If we assume that it's white's move, then let's say after king e5, king e7, black manages to keep the opposition and prevent white from reaching one of those three key squares. However, if it is black to move, let's switch that. If it is black to move, then he needs to go to one of those squares and allows the white king to go to one of the critical key squares. And now white is winning. The main connection to the position with pawns on the fifth rank is that white now can easily force a situation where he has one of the key squares of the pawn on the fifth rank, simply because here he is, if you remember the key squares, he is on one of them, so he can just push the pawn and win the game. It's all about the right to move. If white can go to one of those, he will win. If not, it's a draw. Black must keep the opposition to prevent white from going to the key squares. Let's now look at some examples that show this principle in full effect. Let's look at this position. It is white to move, and again, I forgot about that. It's white to move. What about this? Is this a draw, or is white losing? Yeah, it's all about the key squares again. If we remember, it's a little bit tricky because we looked at it from the white side. Remember that these three are the key squares. Black needs to get his king to one of those squares and he will win the game. Promote the pawn and win. Yeah, so how does white need to defend? Black's idea is clearly to go here or go here. So we need to react accordingly. The only way to draw here is the move king to d1. Yeah, it's very important to note that king d2 is not working, as after king d4 black gets the opposition, and after king here necessary, otherwise black will occupy this. Black plays king c4 for the opposition, and he will get to one of the key squares. After this we have managed and will win the game by promoting the pawn. We go back to the initial position. If white goes king e2, it's very important now that black finds the right move. The only move now to win is king e4 for the opposition. King d2, king d4, king c2. White can never ever go here because black gets to one of the key squares. King c2, king c4, and we have the same position as before, with black getting to one of his squares. This leaves white with king d1. Very important now, if black goes king d4, we play king d2, and we make sure that he can not go to one of those squares. Here, here, and again. Now white has got the opposition and controls the key squares. After king d1 in the initial position, black can try king e4. Yeah, setting up a last try. Yeah, what should white do now? If white now goes to d2, again we have forgotten about the opposition and will lose. King d2 would be a huge mistake. We need to make sure that after king d4 we play king d2. The right move therefore is king c2. King e2 draws as well, but king c2 is a little bit more thematic. Now black will go here, and after king d2 we again have the position that we desire. If black tries to push the pawn now, he can make no progress whatsoever. King c2, c3, and only now we need to be cautious. Of course, we must make sure that we now make the right king move. If we go to d1, black gets the opposition and will promote the pawn. We need to remember the first positions that we looked at on the 6th rank. It's all about the right to move. King c1 is the right way to go. After king d3 we play king d1 for the opposition.
Check.
And only
stalemate.
A stalemate is possible. This was a little bit more complicated way, or a little bit more complicated position to look at these kind of key squares and the opposition. Let us now look at an example where the pawn is only on the 3rd rank. What are the key squares now? Comparable with the pawn on the 4th rank, it's all about those 3 squares. This is where white wants to be. With white to move, we have a clear path to that. King c2, king e7, king b3, king d6, king b4. Yeah, we're just about to go there, but black is quick enough to prevent us from going there immediately. But after king c4, of course, only king c4, we will be able to get the opposition and get to one of the key squares. King d6, king b5. Mission accomplished. But how do we win now? black plays king c7. The next move, of course, is of utmost importance. Should we now play c4 or should we play king c5? The best move, of course, is king c5. What we need to get to is, we need to get to those squares, because those are the critical squares, the key squares, for the pawn being on the 4th rank. We need to conquer one of those squares. So king c5 is the key move. c4 would only draw. Then we don't manage to get where we want to be. Black now needs to move to the side here, and now here we go. We now have occupied one of the key squares for the pawn on the 4th rank. This means once we are there, we can start to advance. c4, king d7, c5. Yeah, if the pawn is on the 5th rank, those are the key squares, and we are there, so we can push the pawn. c5, king c8, and now king c6, getting the opposition, and now we promote the pawn. Note that it is very, very common that you don't push the pawn first, but you need to use the king to gain the space with those maneuvers with the opposition to get to the key squares, and only then you can really push the pawn. It is almost always bad to move the pawn first and then go with the king, as you need the king in front of the pawn, like this, to get to the key squares. Let us now look at a special case with king and pawn against the lone king, the side pawns, h pawn and a pawn. Yeah, a typical example, white has the extra a pawn. Can he win? The simple answer is no, absolutely never. If the defending king is ahead of the pawn, in front of the pawn, you can never win, simply because there are the stalemate motifs. Let's say white to move. The best
Check.
White can do is something like that.
Stalemate.
And it's a stalemate. Black just needs to get to the edge of the board, basically to the corner, to block the pawn, to draw. Very, very simple. In fact, there are even drawing positions where the king is not in the corner. Let's look at a very well-known type of position like that. Here it all looks nice for white. You have the a pawn and the black king is not in the corner. But with black to move, black plays king c5. And what he does is trap the white king on the edge of the board. Yeah, white only has this move, and then black plays king a6. Yeah, and how are you ever going to make progress there? If white plays king a5, black can easily reach the drawing position that we have seen before. So there is really no point in allowing that. White must play king a7 or push the pawn. After king a7, black just keeps his side opposition here and makes sure that white can make no progress whatsoever. So maybe here a5 should be tried. And again, just king c7. If white now does this, we reach the corner. So king a7, king c8, and it will just be a draw. King d6, up, corner, a6, and we trap the king. This can be done for quite a while, and at the end, white is
Stalemate.
basically stalemating himself. It's just a draw, and a very, very common theme in those endgames with the h pawn or the a pawn. Let's look at some other cases of those type of pawns. Yeah, what about this position? Can black reach the corner? White to move does win because he is quick enough. He reaches one of the two critical squares for the h pawn. Black is simply Too late. White will promote. The H pawn is notoriously tricky. Let's look at a little bit. It's in a little bit more complicated way. Just a moment. Yeah, what about this? This looks very easily winning for white. 2 pawns. Isn't this simple? Yeah, it's not that simple.
Stalemate. Stalemate.
Yep, those simple moves don't do it. We really don't have any choice. King f5. Black only has king g7. And yeah, how do we win now? If we know our king and pawn endgames, we will quickly see that
Check.
after this we get to a position where white wins. And we promote our pawn. A different example. Yeah, let's look at this position. It's white to move. It looks very nice. We have 2 pawns, but can we win and how? The first move is pretty clear. We need to play king e6 here, protecting our pawn. If black gets to take the pawn and will return to b7, he will draw very easily because we don't get to the critical squares for the b pawn on the 5th rank. Yeah, black now plays king d8. How do we continue now? Yeah, it's very simple in one way, but looking at it a little bit more detail reveals that there are some tricks. You cannot go here
Stalemate.
because of stalemate. This means we have to give up the pawn now. Okay, but how exactly? King d5 or king e5? The right move is king d5. Yeah, black now takes the pawn. If he is not taking the pawn, let's say he goes here, then the win is easily achieved.
Check.
We just get to one of the key squares and win the game. Black must take. Here, I mean, he must take. Yeah, how to continue now? If we go king c5, he will go king c7 for the opposition, and we are not able to make any progress now. So b6 must be the move. Yeah, and what now? King d8, king c8. What are we doing? After king d8, how do we win? Yeah, it's again the opposition doing the trick. King c8, king c6, king b8, b7, and we will promote. Of course, if black goes to c8 right away, king c6 is the key move to help us advance and promote the pawn. Yeah, it is tricky, but if you know the ideas about the key squares and the opposition, you will work out those things relatively easily with a little bit of time on your clock. Okay, let's look at something a little bit more tricky. Here white defends against 2 pawns, a double pawn. Yeah, it's very important to know that those 2 pawns are a big difference to just 1 pawn, because black always, in this case it's black, has a reserve move with the 2nd pawn, the behind pawn, let's say. This means we very often can gain the opposition, which is not possible in other situations without the pawn. Let's say, for example, white plays king f2, king e4. Yeah, this is a very easy draw if there was just 1 f pawn.
Check.
But with 2 f pawns, we will get to this situation. Without this pawn. Black has nothing
Check.
better
Stalemate.
than the stalemate. But with the f pawn, we just
Check.
play f5, and the white king needs to give up the decisive squares so that we can promote. Yeah, a very useful thing to know. It's a big difference with two pawns, even if they're doubled. Okay, the situation with double pawns can be much more complicated. Let's look at the most complicated example now of this video. Yeah, it's white to move in this position, and in fact white can win here. With king f1, king c4, king e2, king d4. Black is just in time to protect his pawn, but now the double g pawns are set into motion. If black just loses the pawn, he will also lose the game. As we had seen in the earlier example, the double pawn will provide a win. So he must keep the e-pawn as long as possible. However, after g5, he now must leave the protection because he needs to take care of the pawn. If white now is careless and takes on e3, black of course will just draw by king f5. We will not be able to get in front of the pawn anymore, and black draws easily. So what do we need to do? We need to play g4 first, making sure that those squares are covered. After g4, black has nothing better than king e6, and now white grabs the pawn. Now we basically get the situation from the position before. With two g pawns, we win no matter what.
Check.
Yeah, and we have the typical situation with without the g4 pawn.
Check. Stalemate.
It's just like this. And with the pawn after g5, king g8, g7, we will win. Yeah, it's still
Check.
slightly tricky, but we know that at the end our g-pawn will promote. Let's go all the way back to the start of all this. King f1 really looks like a totally a normal move, but it's also the only move that wins. If white plays g4, then king c4 is drawing. King f1, king d3, threatening king d2. So white must go king e1, and now king e4. The big difference is that now, after this, we are not able to get to this situation where we get the pawns to g5 and g4. The only move that we can try now is g5, and after king f5, black will take the pawn and of course draws this easily. Yeah, this is a video of about 34 minutes, and if you have no prior knowledge of king and pawn endgames, you will have learned quite a lot here, I believe. It's a very good idea to watch this more than once if really lots of concepts here were new to you. And also it's an excellent idea to practice those simple positions against a friend or against an engine. Maybe even an engine is a better way to do it, because the engine, any computer, will defend perfectly in those positions. It can simply calculate till the end. And if you practice this sufficiently, you will get to a point where you play the simple endings here, just those two kings and a pawn perfectly. Stuff like that with more pawns, of course, is a little bit more difficult. But if you know the basics behind them, you have excellent chances to find the right solution given enough time. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this first video on king and pawn endgames. There will be many more to come. Thanks for watching.